goodness. This is just great. So hello and welcome to everyone. And thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for being here, because your presence here, it means that much to me, because you are sharing with me a journey that is deeply personal. A journey that I actually did not anticipate embarking on. When I started writing this novel, it was to tell this tragic story, a story of love, loss and betrayal, and survival. It was just to share this story of two extraordinary people and people in their lives. Helen and Peter, by all means, they were exceptional parents. They were amazing parents. They devoted their lives for their kids. Peter, in fact, if there was a fault, it was because he was such an overprotective father. And Helen, the same. So 50 years later, for Helen to come out and tell her daughter, 50 years later, that Sakura had another sister, Helen had a baby girl, that she was forced to give up for adoption at birth. It was unimaginable. So for Sakura and her brother Nevan, this just shattered the very foundation that they built their lives on. Because it was Peter who instilled the values of family, the very foundation Sakura and Nevan built their lives on, their families on. So to think that the same father forced Helen to give up his firstborn, it was unimaginable. But, human life, we are complicated creatures, right? We have desires, we have feelings, we have emotions. But as for Helen, well, Helen was a young girl, 22-year-old, living in Sri Lanka in 1972. A culture that was very rigid and had all these expectations of women, rigid expectations, and not very forgiving. So 22-year-old in 1972, living in that culture, that society, to be pregnant, unwed, or to be divorced and single, raising a kid, those were not choices that the society gave. So for any one of those options would have been a condemnation. She would have been condemned, not just her, but the child would have been condemned. And her family would have been condemned. Helen had sisters. So those were really not options for her, living in that rigid society that put all these expectations on women. So for Helen, the act of giving up her child, it didn't come from a place of freedom. It was a desperate act of survival, something that she had to do. And of course, it's not really hard to understand, even in this society that we live in this progressive country. A couple of decades ago, even more, you would hear this story. But the difference is, we have people who had gone through that experience. We have people in our lives, we know people, but none of us would look at them and think any less of them. We wouldn't attach a stigma simply because they didn't grow up in the family or with the people that gave birth to them. It makes no difference to us. So the point that this story took a different turn for me, a different journey was introduced when Sakura and Nevan, when they tried to find their sister. They couldn't rest with the family values that were instilled in them by the same father who gave up his firstborn. That ran deep in them, and they couldn't rest. So they had to find this child, they had to find this sister. And they were shocked, and I was shocked to learn this reality of this ugly truth of the society. And the society collectively told them to leave it be. The reason? The stigma associated with adoption still runs deep in these communities. in these segments of the world. As much progress as we have made in these countries, in these societies on the surface, we still hold on to these ugly realities, the norms, the social norms, and these boxes that we tick off. The society collectively told them to leave it be. There is a good chance even her husband, Mala's husband, with whom she had 2 children, that he will think less of her. There's a chance that he might even leave her. Surely his family, her in-laws, will ostracize her. They will think of it as a betrayal. Imagine that. This child who was given up for adoption by her birth parents, who's already a victim of the society, now today in 2024 stands to be re-victimized again for no fault of hers. Now that ugly reality, that ugly truth of the society that I came from, segments of the society, I got to be fair, it's not everyone. There are a lot of progressive people, but there's still a large sector of this community in South Asia and in the Middle East and certain parts of the world, even among us here, that still holds on to these norms which they masquerade as cultural values. And that ugly truth about that segment of the society, it just stirred up all these personal memories to me. It brought all these memories to the surface. My own experiences of my friends, my family, my close friends. I couldn't help but think of my beautiful, accomplished friend. She is going head to head in the corporate world, earning a high 6-figure salary, and in the boardroom you look at her, she is a killer. She's skilled, she's powerful, yet she's entrapped in this toxic marriage where she is emotionally and physically abused. Unfortunately for her, as progressive as she is on one end, on the other hand, she is still entrapped and shackled by this same society that gave birth to her and raised her. So she doesn't have the courage to escape this, because for her, respect, her worth comes from the way that society that she moves around and sees her, how that perceives her, not her own self-worth. And it's not a surprise because, in 1960 in Sri Lanka, we produced the first woman prime minister in the world. So you had a woman sitting in the helm of the country leading the world, and yet women didn't have very fundamental rights when it comes down to that. And then I think of this dear friend of mine, a progressive, pragmatic, educated woman who went through childhood abuse, who was raped as a child, but rose above that trauma, made a beautiful life for herself. But that trauma only to be compounded by her husband, now her ex-husband, when he called her damaged goods. He dehumanized her with those words, damaged goods. Appalling, like crazy. But where does that come from? Where does that notion? What would make a person think that it's okay, be it anger, whatever the circumstances are, to call a victim damaged? So that takes me to 2017, an article actually I read a few weeks ago. An Instagram post by a well-known activist in Sri Lanka. He was highlighting an advertisement, a promotion run by a medical clinic in one of the magazines in UK, in London. The medical clinic was advertising hymen reconstruction surgery, another point that I have made in the book. Hymen reconstruction surgery. And the advertisement ran by these professional medical professionals, medical doctors, and it read and promoted hymen reconstruction surgery as a way of restoring dignity to rape victims. Imagine that. Why would anyone think that it is a rape victim that needs their dignity restored? It's isn't it the perpetrator, the rapist that doesn't have dignity to begin with? And why on earth an educated professional like a medical doctor think it's okay to promote the surgery in those terms? So that takes to something more deep and fundamental within these societies. The way that they perceive women, the expectations that they put on women, for them to save themselves, their purity, or to prove themselves to a man that may or may not come. But the funny thing is no one is checking the virginity of a man, right? If someone finds it, let me know. But until we change this fundamental way of thinking, there's going to be another friend of mine that's going to be subject to the same cruelty. Until we change the way this society treats women, for that matter, anyone that decides to walk a different path than what the society has designed, we are going to find women, children, and even men, should they decide to take a different path, be different than what everyone else has decided them to be, they are going to be victims. There's going to be a human cost. So at that point, my journey into this book, that's when it changed and became a mission. Because I realized, even me, when I was growing up, I was not exactly someone who followed the path that the society has designed. Me and my brother, we were always pariahs in the society. So what we did was, we surrounded ourselves with people like us, like-minded people. And then I came to Canada. It really didn't matter. But, it does matter, because anyone who knows me personally, I do have a bone to pick with the Sri Lankan culture. I often don't say a lot of positive things, but we do have a lot of positive things. On one hand, we have produced South Asia together, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, collectively we have produced a lot of leaders in the world, women. But yet, when it comes to women's rights, children's rights, on a very fundamental level, we don't even have autonomy over our body. Someone else decides how pure we are. We still have the need to have hymen reconstruction surgery clinics. We have medical doctors promoting as restoring dignity. We have stigma attached to adoption, and the list goes on. So until we start talking about it and start pushing back, instead of bubble wrapping ourselves, which is what I did, this is not going to change. And change is hard. Change is really hard, because especially when these issues are embedded in the culture, you see them as cultural values, although they are not. Values cannot victimize another human being. They are not values. They are just these norms that we have created for ourselves, and we hold on to them because it gives you a little bit of self-esteem if there is someone that you can look down on. So that is when my journey took a turn and it became a mission. So with this book, with telling this story, yes, it is a tragic story, and it's a story of real people who have gone through something really sad. It's a tragic story. I mean, you love, you lost, you have desires, and then you have the society that you have to survive through. But at the same time, it's more, because these are incidents that involve real people. There are social issues that press these people to take and live the life that they did. There's a human cost attached to the story as well as everyone around us. So I truly believe only through conversation and exploring these issues that we can get people to think of their action and whether they are really values or what we can do about them. If I can change at least one person, if I can get one person to think of the way that they perceive others, then I would take it as a win. So For that reason, I really appreciate all of you being here, because all of you being here, it is supporting me in this my journey in trying to make a positive change. Hoping that another friend of mine wouldn't have to suffer at the hand of the society, or anyone else for that matter, trying to prove themselves. So, thank you.